The HOA thought they could push around a simple woman. They thought they could trespass, intimidate, and threaten her into submission. What they didn't know was that my wife wasn't defenseless, and she wasn't alone. Standing beside her were two retired military K9 dogs, Brutus and Delta, dogs trained to take down armed suspects in combat zones. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now. So, when the HOA decided to teach her a lesson, they had no idea they were walking straight into a fight they could never win. It began, as these insurgencies always do, with a single, arrogant demand. A letter taped to our door from the HOA president, Karen. "Remove the dogs," it read. "They disrupt property values." I laughed, but my wife, Elaine, didn't. She knew what these organizations were capable of. Brutus and Delta weren't just pets. They were family, loyal partners who had served with me overseas. Disciplined, obedient, and harmless unless commanded. But Karen didn't see retired heroes. She saw a violation she could exploit. The escalation was swift. Another letter, this one unmarked, slid under our door. "Comply or it will get worse." Then came the drone. It hovered over our backyard, a buzzing violation of our privacy, dipping low enough to make Delta snarl and Brutus pace the fence line. I tracked it with binoculars and watched it land on Karen's balcony. When I confronted her, she just smiled. Neighborhood safety requires oversight. Oversight turned to harassment. But what Karen failed to understand was who she was harassing. While I was a veteran, Elaine's military legacy was far more specialized. For 12 years, she was an elite K9 handler for the Air Force security forces. Her expertise wasn't in policy. It was in patrol work, explosive detection, and controlled aggression. Brutus, a German Shepherd, and Delta, a Belgian Malinois, weren't just her former assets. They were her partners, decorated for their service in active war zones. She had forged their discipline in the crucible of training and deployment. The community saw a quiet woman who loved her dogs. They had no idea they were looking at two soldiers and their commanding officer. Karen saw two big dogs. She had no idea she was provoking a highly specialized military unit. Karen's power was built on a foundation of cronyism and brute force. Her primary weapon was a thuggish private compliance firm owned by a political ally. She used these men as her personal enforcement arm, terrorizing the neighborhood with fabricated violations and threats. We learned from neighbors that she had bullied an elderly couple into spending thousands on unnecessary landscaping by having her thugs show up at their door weekly. She had forced another family to sell their home after a months-long campaign of harassment over the color of their children's playset. She had used her thugs to bully and intimidate for years, but they had never been dispatched to a target that could fight back. While Elaine was the tactical expert, I became the legal strategist. My role was to operate in the background, building a fortress of legal documentation around our family. I treated every act of aggression as evidence in a future prosecution. I documented every threatening letter, logged every drone incursion with time-stamped photographs, and began researching the specific laws Karen and her thugs were violating. The drone itself was a potential violation of state privacy laws. Her thugs, operating under the guise of the HOA, were fabricating municipal codes. Their actions fell squarely under Title 18 U.S. Code 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. And their repeated unauthorized entries onto our property constituted criminal trespass under Penal Code 602. Karen was preparing her thugs for a physical assault. I was preparing a federal lawsuit that would dismantle her entire organization. It was a race to see which trap would spring first. The day of the confrontation was a perfect Saturday morning. Elaine was tending her flowers in the front yard. That's when Karen's compliance team rolled up. 4 men, their faces set in grim lines, not even pretending to be friendly. Karen stood behind them on the public sidewalk, her phone raised, ready to film what she believed would be Elaine's public humiliation. "Remove the dogs. Remove the fence, or we remove you," one of them barked, taking a step onto our lawn. Elaine didn't flinch. "This is private property," she stated, her voice calm but carrying the unmistakable weight of command. "Under Fourth Amendment protections, you cannot enter without a warrant. Leave now." The lead thug sneered. "We don't need a warrant. HOA authorization is enough. It was a blatant lie. HOA rules cannot override federal and state law. They were committing a crime in broad daylight. They were ready to use force." The moment the lead thug lunged for Elaine, he wasn't just breaking the law. He had just given a trained military K9 handler lawful justification to meet force with superior force. He reached for her arm, but Brutus was faster. The German Shepherd detonated from his position like a missile, executing a perfect drive-bite directly to the man's center mass. It wasn't a mauling. It was a tactical strike. The 90-pound K9 slammed into the man's chest, knocking him flat onto the pavement, the wind driven from his lungs. Brutus stood over him, a deep, vibrating growl his only warning. Another thug, seeing his partner neutralized, grabbed a metal landscaping rod and swung at Delta. Wrong move. The Belgian Malinois, a blur of motion, darted sideways, evading the clumsy strike. She then latched onto his forearm with a controlled bite hold, her jaws locking with calibrated pressure. He howled, dropping the rod, but Delta didn't shred his arm. She immobilized him, holding him fast with the perfect discipline of her training. "Call them off! Call them off!" Karen shrieked, her voice cracking with a panic she hadn't anticipated. "Delta, hold!" Elaine commanded. The dog froze, her muscles rigid, pinning the man in place without tearing tissue. It was controlled, precise military discipline. A third thug tried to flank them, rushing toward my wife. Brutus, without releasing the man on the ground from his intimidating watch, spun his head, eyes locked on the new threat, awaiting orders. Elaine snapped her command, "Brutus, drive!" The shepherd disengaged, charged, and collided with the man's midsection, sending him sprawling into the dirt. He never even laid a hand on her. By then the street had come alive. Neighbors poured out of their homes, phones recording everything. "They're trespassing," someone shouted. "Call the cops." The entire narrative Karen had hoped to create, one of a defiant resident and her dangerous animals, was being destroyed in real time by dozens of witnesses. Her intimidation had backfired spectacularly. I stepped forward from the driveway, my own phone recording, and said loud enough for the entire street to hear, "No, Karen. Under California Civil Code 3342, liability does not apply if a dog defends its handler from trespassers committing a crime. You just filmed your own people attacking my wife and getting neutralized for it." The arrival of the sheriff's deputies sealed her fate. Karen, contorting herself into a victim, screeched, "They set their attack dogs on us! These animals are weapons. I demand they be destroyed." Her thugs groaned theatrically. But the deputies weren't looking at them. They were looking at Brutus and Delta, who, at Elaine's quiet command, were now sitting obediently at her side, alert, but perfectly calm. That discipline spoke louder than Karen's hysteria. I handed one deputy my phone. Dozens of other neighbors offered theirs. The video evidence was overwhelming. The deputy's jaw tightened as he watched the footage. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Karen, "you and your associates are under investigation for criminal trespass under Penal Code 602 and assault under Penal Code 240. Those dogs didn't attack without cause. They defended their handler from an imminent, credible threat. Karen's voice cracked. That's not true. The HOA authorizes HOA rules. The deputy cut in, his voice sharp. Do not supersede state law. You had no authority to be here. Frankly, you're lucky these dogs are so disciplined. A lesser-trained animal would have caused permanent injury. In a final, desperate gambit, Karen tried. Fine. Charge me. But at least have those beasts put down. The deputy shook his head. Wrong again. California Civil Code 3342 specifically exempts canines who defend their owners from trespassers committing a crime. These animals won't face any consequences. You will. The crowd erupted in cheers. The deputies cuffed Karen right there on the sidewalk, her face burning with humiliation as they read her Miranda rights. Her thugs, whining louder than before, were loaded into the back of a cruiser. As the squad cars rolled away, Elaine knelt and hugged both Brutus and Delta, their tails finally wagging. They're not just dogs, she said to me, her eyes fierce and proud. They're family. And Karen just learned the hard way what happens when you mess with our family. The neighborhood changed that day. The HOA's reign of intimidation was broken. Brutus and Delta had just written their names into HOA legend.